Hey, what is up, ladies and gents? My name is Prashil, and welcome back to my channel, Synergy X Studios, the home of everything art and tech related. And in today's video, as you've probably already checked out the title, we're going to be looking at the M1 chip and my thoughts on Apple's newest creation. Let's get into the video. So Apple's latest keynote debuted the new M1 chip, which honestly is taking a completely different direction from the conventional Intel chips they used prior to this. Right off the bat, power and efficiency seems to be Apple's highest priority with the new lineup of products that they've come up with that utilize the M1 chip. And we'll get into that in a little more detail. But right now, let's talk about the absolute battering that Intel has been taking at the minute. I mean, first, AMD comes up with their new line of processors, which is really taking the heat to Intel. And then now Apple comes roaring into the game and just absolutely destroying their old Intel-based products. I mean, it's not really looking too good for Intel, so I guess we'll see how that goes for them. All right, but let's get into the M1 chips themselves. Now, just looking at this, their online website states that, small chip, giant leap. And this seems to be the theme throughout their website. And from what I can tell, and from all the early reviews, it actually seems to be living up to that promise. And I'm gonna be honest, I was quite skeptical of this because especially looking at the keynote, Apple was quite ambiguous with their performance ratings. But it may well be that they might just be outperforming the expectations that we had based off their ambiguous data that they'd given in their keynote. And even I was a skeptic. I mean, they were comparing Apple's latest lineup to, the latest Windows devices without really giving us an idea of what the latest and greatest Windows device they were comparing to. So, despite all of that ambiguity surrounding their keynote, it seems that the actual performance benchmarks, they really seem to be hitting the nail on the mark. Now, starting with the MacBook Pro and Air, Apple claims that the battery life on both of these devices have been almost doubled thanks to the new and improved M1 chip that devours performance but sips on power. Now, this is what Apple's claimed, and it's kind of crazy because just looking at the figures, you get up to 17 hours of wireless playback on the MacBook Pro and up to 15 hours on the MacBook Air. And this is crazy considering that the 2019 models can only get you up to about 10 hours. So this really shows the efficient aspect of the M1 chip. Now, this is absolutely insane. In fact, MKBHD stated that he was able to get away with only charging his MacBook Pro M1 edition once a week with medium usage. Now, this is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, that's the kind of battery champ we were actually looking for in laptops these days. Now, further to this, there are now claims that the CPU speeds have been increased by 3.5 times, with graphics performance being 5.5 times faster. And actually looking at the early reviews and the benchmarks, this actually holds up, which is absolutely crazy since there is no dedicated graphics card on the M1 chip. In fact, Dying Light, which is an older game but still graphically intensive to a moderate extent, was tested on the new MacBook Air and was able to actually perform pretty well. I mean, the game was more than playable. And this is astonishing given the sheer size of the MacBook Air. This really shows the M1's capabilities. But also the fact that the MacBook Air doesn't actually have a fan, it's actually a fanless unit, is absolutely astonishing because, as we all know, the hotter a CPU gets, the less efficient it gets. Yet there was no alarming problems with thermals, which is just incredible. However, it is important to note that while the M1 chip may be similar on the MacBook Air to the MacBook Pro, it isn't exactly all that equal. Now, the M1 chip in the MacBook Air is slightly less powerful than the M1 chip in the MacBook Pro 13. So for anyone who's really into nitpicking about those facts, now you know. Now, I know I've said a lot of good things about Apple, and it may seem like I'm an Apple fanboy, and I can tell you that is not the case, but it's just the sheer fact that, 4K editing along with, graphically intensive games can be enjoyed on the MacBook Air, which is a fanless unit. It just goes to show how efficient the M1 chip really is, not only in terms of power, but also in power management. Now, in terms of the MacBook Pro 13-inch, there really isn't much to say because, well, it can do everything the MacBook Air can do, just a little bit better. And I guess the touch bar is also an added bonus if you're really into that. Now with the MacBook Minis or Mac Minis, whatever they're called, they don't really pique my interest. I've never really been that interested in mini PCs. But I think it is important to know that the M1 chip variants definitely obliterate their Intel counterparts. So if you are in the market for a mini PC and you're looking at Apple, then definitely get the M1 chip variants. So then Apple's new lineup is pretty damn impressive. I mean, especially at those price points and the performance which is on par with Apple's higher end Intel devices. I mean, it seems pretty damn good to be true, right? And that's the thing, while you may be lining up to just purchase one of their silicon products, don't. At least not just yet. And I'll tell you why. A chip on the shoulder. Now, these new Apple products aren't perfect. The new M1 uniform chip that Apple's been boasting about has one really, really interesting flaw. Now, because it's one single uniform M1 chip, the CPU, GPU, security, and RAM are all sorted onto one chip. And that means there is absolutely no room for improvement. And so you cannot upgrade the RAM. And despite the fact that Apple's always been kind of stingy about this, the fact is now if you wish to purchase one of these laptops, you have to plan ahead, especially also with storage as well. So RAM and storage, plan ahead. Otherwise, it could cost you down the line. Now, Apple has been going absolutely nuts, removing all their ports from all of their devices lately. And, the measly 4 ports that you got with the last generation MacBook Pro has now been downgraded to the painstakingly low 2 USB Type-C ports. And honestly, I feel like this puts a whole dent in the whole portability thing, because now if you have demanding work on the go, you're going to need a bunch of adapters. And at worst, you're going to need a dock, which is an added expense that you shouldn't have to pay for. So if the number of ports on a device can make or break a purchase for you, I'm sure that this is a very important piece of information for you. Optimization for most software hasn't exactly been done yet. I mean, all of the apps that are native to Apple software will run great straight out of the box, no problem. But for other apps, such as Adobe Premiere, especially when it comes to video editing, or the entire Adobe lineup in and of itself, won't exactly be running smoothly as opposed to their Apple produced counterparts. So I think this is something that's important to note here. All in all, Apple has done a pretty great job coming up with their M1 chip, and I personally think that breaking up with Intel was probably the best thing they could have done. Now, can I recommend the Apple Silicon lineup? And the answer is yeah. I mean, if you're in the market for an Apple laptop, I'd say now is probably the best time to purchase one. I mean, at the price point and the performance you're getting, it's an absolute bargain, which is not something I would usually say about Apple. But I guess in this weird day and age, I'd make an exception. Thanks for watching, ladies and gents. I hope you gained some insight on the new Apple M1 silicon-based devices. And yeah, I guess I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.